Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, excellent.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the webinar. We'll just start with the webinar shortly. Thank you so much for waiting again.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you once again for joining the webinar today. It's to celebrate the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, we know that emerging data and reports from the front lines have shown that all types of violence against women and girls, in particular domestic violence, has intensified. This is a shadow pandemic growing amidst the COVID-19 crisis, and we need a global collective effort to stop it. Violence against women and girls is one of the most widespread, persistent, and devastating human rights violations in our world today. And it remains largely unreported due to the impunity, silence, stigma, and shame surrounding it. This year, on the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women, which is celebrated on the 25th of November, the Standing Committee of Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights, including HIV and AIDS, that is SCORA, of BMSS-Bangladesh and MSAI India, are working together in order to organize a campaign called Voicing the Sheroes. Voicing the Sheroes is a campaign that focuses on sensitizing medical students and healthcare providers against the topic of violence against women, and it aims to raise awareness and educate the public on this issue of concern. Our campaign aims to create opportunities for members of MSI India and BMSS Bangladesh to be advocates for eliminating violence against women, with the hope to see a world where all women have access to physical, mental, sexual, and reproductive health, and in an effort to reach gender equality and women's empowerment in line with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Without much ado, I would like to start today's discussion with my first question dedicated to Mr. Nabi. We also have our other panelists, Aditi Pradhan from MSAI India, and our SCORA director, Fátima Rodríguez. So first question would be to Mr. Nabi. But before I start, I would like to provide a short introduction on him. Mr. Nabi has started his legal profession with Shawn Novel and Associates back in 2014, where he undertook his mini pupillage under the guidance of the head of the firm, Barrister Shawn Novel. He then continued his journey with SLA as an associate again in 2015, having just graduated from law school. Mr. Nabi specializes in corporate and commercial practice, with keen interest in civil litigation and family law matters. He's passionate about human rights law and has worked with various agencies pertaining to matters of violence against women and children. Mr. Nabi is a barrister at Law of England and Wales, having been called as such at the Honourable Society of Lincolnshire. He's completed his LLB honours from the University of London and his LLM International Commercial Law at the University of Northumbria at Newcastle, UK. He's also an accredited civil and commercial mediator with the ADR ODR International UK, and is also a lecturer of law. Mr. Nabi, how are you doing?
Hi, Tasnia. Thank you for the really kind introduction. I'm doing well, alhamdulillah. And a very good evening to you and everyone present.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our first question is dedicated to you today. So my question to you is, do you think that the laws and policies that exist in our country today, they create an environment to enable women's access to justice?
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Tasnia, for that question. This is a question that probably does not have a clear answer, at least when I'm speaking in terms of Bangladesh context. We do have laws, we do have regulations, we do have deterrence in place, but probably the question that I would like to address is, are they, effective? Are they actually working or not? That's probably what I'm going to address in the first place. Violence against women has been a prevalent issue in our society for a very long time now. This lockdown, if not, it has been an indicator, probably has kind of given us a picture of what is hidden underneath the society. We've been hearing stories of, things happening inside home, things coming out in social media and on news as well, on an unprecedented level. And coming to that, we have had laws, regulations in place all the time. Since the birth of Bangladesh, we have had them in place. But it's sad to see that they have never been truly effective or implemented. We have, let's say, for example, I'll just name a couple of acts just to tell you how we have things in place, but then I'll kind of portray how they're not effective or how we kind of need a change in the way we're trying to implement them, so that I think it will probably benefit the society as a whole and, of course, the women in general. We have a couple of acts in place which deal with certain issues. So we have, first of all, the penal code, which deals with all kinds of violence, not specifically just against women, but against men as well. But then again, there are a couple of sections which specifically just deals with women. Probably the most important act in place that we have is the Prevention of Oppression Against Women and Children Act, which is more popularly known as Nari o Shishu Nirjaton Damo Ain 2000. Before I discuss about the other ones, this is something that I want to talk to you about for a little bit, because I have advised clients, I have advised friends, I have advised colleagues on this matter, victims of domestic abuse, of domestic violence. But as a lawyer, as a person from this profession, it's very sad to see that this law, which is quite strong, at least theoretically, is not very effective when it comes to play. For example, this act strictly tells you what you can do or what you cannot do. Let's say if you're being tortured by your husband, if there's violence against your husband. I mean, the husband is the cause of the violence, or let's say you're facing issues at your in-laws. But what happens when you're facing the same violence at your own house? You have no idea how many times I've dealt with friends, I would say, who have called up and said that, so this is what's going on in my house, and it's being done by my own father or my brother. And it's very sad to see. And the thing is, when I have to advise them on what to do and what not to do, I have to tell them that the law over here is very unhelpful. It's not that they cannot get a recourse under the law, they can, but it's a very complicated process. Which brings me to the next issue, which is, in general, the implementation of a specific law, or how do you go on to address an issue when you are facing violence? First thing is, when you go to a police station in Bangladesh, it's unlikely that they're going to take the matter seriously. The first thing that they're probably going to say is that, have you tried resolving this mutually? Which is always no, and that's not going to work, but they're probably going to say, try rectifying the problem. If not, they're going to ask you to go for a safe haven, somewhere you can move and continue proceeding with. Women in Bangladesh in general, usually I've seen, do not have a second place to go to, which, where they can fight their battles from. They'll have to go back to the same house that they have been facing violence in. And that is an example of how, even though we have a law and policy in place, it's not very effective because of how we are addressing the whole matter. We also have other laws to prevent, let's say, acid attacks, sexual violence against women. We have all of those in places. We have had them since British era. We have had amendments to them. We have had new laws as well. But the root of the problem is that when we're trying to implement those matters, it's constructed in a way, or our society is constructed or works in a certain way, which supports this violence. How? The whole matter is in place so that a man or the person who are in charge, who are supposed to deal with the matter, they don't understand the severity of the matter. This is an issue that I'll probably address at a later part of the webinar. But for now, coming back to the law itself, they do not understand the severity of the problem. They do not know how to deal with it. They are stuck with some medieval laws, and instead of making a practical application of the law, they go into the theoretical application of it. So now, if a woman who has faced violence, be it in her home, be it in her professional sphere, when she would go to a police officer, the first thing he would probably say is, have you done your medical test? It's not about consoling her, not knowing about what the problem is, but rather she needs to go to the hospital and get a medical report. That kind of shows, and that by itself is a huge problem. When you go to a hospital in Bangladesh and say that, yes, I have faced problems as such, they're unlikely to be very helpful to you because they don't want to deal with police problems in the hospital. So this whole matter is kind of constructed and has been working in a way that has not been very useful to the women in Bangladesh at least. There are laws and policies in place, but I just don't feel that they have been very effective, and that is probably worse for people who are not as privileged as probably we are, but that's also the same for people of, let's say, of very high society, if you'd like to call it, or privileged society, they would probably see the same problem as well. So most of the things that are mostly not reported, because once they're reported, nothing's done about it. And if someone decides to take it to the court, it gets worse. Our Evidence Act does not prevent you from bringing in the victim's previous sexual history, her sexual preferences, or whatever sexual issues she might have had in the past. In the United Kingdom, they have bars in place which prevents you from questioning the victim about certain matters. Even then, it's not very fair. But in Bangladesh, we do not even have those bars. So even if now a woman wants to go to court and try to sue or bring an action against the person who has violated her or probably has harmed her physically or mentally, it's unlikely that she'll probably continue with it, because it's an embarrassing state of affairs in front of the public, in front of the court, in front of the media. So yes, to kind of summarize what I've been saying, that yes, there are laws and policies in place, but at the same time, the answer is there are no law and policies in place, because none of them, as it stands, are very helpful to the victim. Probably the only way to work around it would be to educate the people who are working with this matter. It could be the police, it could be the hospitals, it could be a lot of things, but changing the law itself wouldn't make a lot of difference, and that's my issue.
Thank you so much for that answer. It was a great reflection on things you already know, and a greater reflection on the overall scenario that exists in the country. I would now like to address Ms. Aditi Pradhan from MSAI India for my next question. Before that, I would like to give a short introduction on her. So Aditi Pradhan, she's a lawyer from India, and she joined Strategic Advocacy for Human Rights, SAHR 2020, to support the strategic litigation work that SAHR undertakes. She has a professional background in constitutional and criminal law with a specific focus on human rights and atrocity crimes. Her experience ranges from clerking at the Supreme Court of India, working in a defense team at an international criminal tribunal, to conducting policy-based research on fair trials. At SAHR, Aditi hopes to balance litigation and research on international human rights issues, especially where they intersect with criminal law. In addition to her integrated Bachelor of Laws from Guru's Gobind Singh Indraprastha University, Amity Law School, Delhi, Aditi holds a Master's of Law from University of California at Berkeley School of Law with specializations in international law and public interest and social justice. He is admitted to practice as an advocate on the roll of Bar Council of Delhi. Hi, Ms. Aditi, how are you doing?
Hi, Tasneha. Lovely to see all of you here. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm great. Yeah, given the circumstances.
Of course, as well as we all can be. So my question to you is that, of course, you could also provide an overview to the existing condition in your country, like Mr. Rafid did. In addition to that, I'd like you to tell you how, since we already discussed the environment and the laws and policies, how you think we can create an environment to enable access to justice. If you can please add that to your answer. Thank you.
Well, before I begin answering, I just want to say thank you to MSAI and BMSS for holding this event and inviting SAHR to speak on this topic. SAHR is a not-for-profit that has been working on the elimination of sexual violence for almost close to a decade now. And I actually also want to thank all the participants who are taking the time to attend this session during the pandemic. I know that some of you may also be busy with COVID duties and other times. So I really appreciate this enthusiasm that the medical student fraternity is showing towards understanding these issues in our society. And I know that since there are two lawyers on board this panel, I also want to apologize if I'm being repetitive. I'll try to minimize repetitiveness from my end. But before, and then of course, before getting to the answer again, sorry. I also want to talk about what violence against women means. Violence against women generally means, it encompasses all acts of gender-based violence that result in physical, sexual or psychological harm to women. But a bit more specifically, they can include acts of intimate partner violence, which could be, to take South Asian examples, domestic violence, marital rape, dowry-related deaths, harassment, dowry-related harassment, female infanticide, and female feticide. And then, of course, there is sexual violence and sexual harassment, which includes rape, forced sexual acts, unwanted sexual advances, forced marriages, eve teasing, and stalking and cyber harassment. There's also human trafficking, where women are bought and sold into slavery for sexual exploitation, female genital mutilation, and child marriages. I think, given the fact that violence against women is such a big concept and includes such a myriad of problems, it doesn't take a lot to understand that there is no one single way to eliminate violence against women. The approach needs to be holistic and multi-sectoral. And and to answer your question, on the question that you asked me is, how can we create an environment which can enable access to justice for women? First of all, I think that we, firstly, as members of the legal community, and then also the entire society, need to acknowledge that justice does not mean the same thing for every individual. The traditional legal schools of thought, Rafid will agree, we are taught that justice means adversarial justice, where an individual who has been wronged approaches the court of law and asks for a remedy. The court then grants the remedy and says, okay, here you go, and the individual's rights stand vindicated. Of course, while this process, let's call this process accountability, is important. It is indeed very important, but it's not the only aspect of justice that a survivor can access or should be able to access. There is, in fact, when you are approaching these accountability mechanisms, there are different hurdles that survivors access. For example, this process can be often traumatic because survivors face social stigma in coming forward about their experiences when they are forced to undergo difficult and strenuous questioning. Rafid talked about the problems with police not registering cases. I'll come back to this again a bit later in my segment, but I think it's important that we realize that justice does not only mean going to a court and just because you get a guilty verdict, all is well and good in the justice system. It requires placing the survivor at the center of things, looking at the methods from the perspective of the survivor and questioning what steps we can take that will benefit them. India, for example, has not always been survivor-centric in its laws and policies. As medical professionals and students, you may have heard about the unscientific two-finger rape test, which has been practiced in India to judge the virginity of women in rape cases. Here, the community that works with survivors of sexual violence borrows a principle of bioethics, which is do no harm. I think you will be aware of it. Now the two-finger rape test is banned, but it's by no means the only practice that continues to re-traumatize survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. And I think one of the first things that we can do is treat violence against women as a public health issue. And the obvious question is, how is something that deals with violence and crime, how can it be a public health issue? But there is precedent for this. Legal recognition for homosexuality in India and the decriminalization of Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code came about as a result of a public health campaign that was led by NAS Foundation, working with men who had sex with men and needed access to public health care facilities. So this leads me to the next segment, that often healthcare professionals are at the front line in instances of violence against women, when women approach these professionals for access to safe medical attention. By practicing methods that preserve the dignity of survivors and allow early identification of risks of recurring violence. And by sharing information with survivors of useful resources and support services, that means access to psychosocial support or NGOs, support groups such as that, healthcare providers can play a big role in helping survivors access justice. Remember, it's not only about going to court, it's also about preserving the dignity of the survivor through that process. And I mean, by all means, healthcare providers are not the only piece of the puzzle. They're a very small, important, but a small part. Laws around violence against women are a hotly debated issue. And I know that this is not a legal audience, but I do want to touch on a common misconception in the Indian society when it comes to criminal laws. So please bear with me. I want to emphasize that stricter or harsher punishments are not the solution to eliminating violence against women. For example, imposing the death penalty will not prevent a crime from happening. I'm talking about rape specifically here. What matters is that there is certainty of punishment. That means that a person who is committing an offense knows that within a period of time, I will be convicted and that I would have to go to prison for X number of years. It may, depending on whether you want to have a harsh or a soft punishment. According to the National Crime Records Bureau of India, for the past 5 years, the rate of conviction for rape in India has been oscillating between 25 to 32%. So that's 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4 cases which result in a guilty verdict, and the rest get a not guilty verdict. And then close to 90% of all the cases in trial are they get carried forward to the next year because of the long pendency issues in our system. So you can imagine that, first of all, let's look at it from the mind of the perpetrator. They know, I'm not assuming any gender, they know that they might get away with it very easily because the process is going to take forever, maybe 5, 6, 7 years. And the longer the trial takes, the easier it is to get a not guilty verdict because witnesses are more likely to forget things. And then papers can be mislaid and so on and so forth. So it's actually beneficial for them that the trial gets delayed. And then, of course, even with a trial that goes forward, there's such a high chance of an acquittal, especially in intimate partner violence cases, that really that it's not about how harsh the punishment can be. It's about whether whatever the punishment is, even if it's small, is being effectively implemented. And but I also want to emphasize that working with the National Crime Records Bureau data can also be problematic. And this is where I want to come into what Rafid was talking about, because it does not show the complete picture. The statistics only cover the incidents that have been reported to the police. So if 10 victims of sexual violence, for example, go to the police, I'm just speculating here because really we are completely in the dark. I'm assuming that 5 can get their cases reported. So going to the police acts as a filter. We don't even know how pervasive sexual violence is, or any other kind of violence against women is. So underreporting of violence, especially against women, is extremely common in India. It is for a lot of reasons, police being one of them, but I also want to take into account that survivors themselves are also often unwilling to report incidents of sexual violence. They're scared of institutional re-traumatization that awaits them, having to, when the rape, two-finger rape test was a thing, having to undergo that process, or losing their dignity in front of a doctor or a police officer who asks them to remove their clothes and examine marks on their body, having to sit through a cross-examination where a defense lawyer will say that, no, you're a person of a promiscuous nature, you were asking for it, and all of those rape myths and stereotypes that come into play there. And then, of course, families. I think in South Asia, we can all understand how big a barrier a family can be, and especially when we attach notions of honor, notions of purity, of subservience to women, when we say that the family is losing its honor by by uh, by by the woman saying that she has been attacked, or other unsavory things coming to light about what has happened to a woman in a family. And then of course there is the police. So colored the police colored by their own patriarchal notions about whether a particular incident or is of gravity, is it serious enough to register a complaint, why don't you go back and try and reconcile your differences with whoever it is. So I think in imagining an environment that enables access to justice for women, we as a society must first envision an egalitarian society that is not shackled by patriarchal norms. And in that, I want to come back to survivor centric justice, which I talked about at the beginning. By placing the needs of the survivor at the center of the process, we create an environment that enables them to access the justice that they want. For one survivor, maybe they want a guilty verdict. For another survivor, maybe they just want their day in court to be able to say in front of the accused that, you did this to me and I feel hurt, and I feel vindicated in just being able to say this in front of an audience and have that audience acknowledge it. And by placing the needs of the survivor at the center of the process, we give them this opportunity. And I think however we may interact with survivors, whether it is as frontline service providers such as doctors and police, or as lawyers representing them in court, or even as members of the community or members of their family, I think this approach can be adopted by everyone. And I think that's where I leave this question to be. Tasnia, back to you.
Thank you so much for that answer. It was a very comprehensive answer indeed. From what I understand is there are multiple sectors of the environment that we need to work on. But the first step is, of course, to recognize that there are these sectors. And the first step is, of course, advocating our surroundings to it. So since we're doing that here, I'd like to move on to our third speaker, Fátima, who's a SCORA director for IFMSA. Before that, I'd like to offer a short introduction on her. So Fátima Rodríguez is from IFMSA Guatemala, and she's our current SCORA director for the term 2020-2021. She was also the SCORA Regional Assistant for Americas in 2019 and 20. She was the Supervising Council member of IFMSA Guatemala for 2020. She was previously also the former NORA, that is the National Officer for Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights in IFMSA Guatemala in the years 2019 and 2018. Hi, Fátima, how are you doing?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for this comprehensive activity.
Great, Fátima. So I will move on to ask you your question for today. So I know in IFMSA we always comprehend on intersectionality when we're trying to look for solutions and problems that we acknowledge. So I'd like to ask you about that. So do you think there's a role of intersecting oppressions, that is intersectionality, on the ability of survivors of violence against women to access these services that we've been talking about and to obtain justice? And also I'd like you to tell us, do you think there are marginalized groups of women who face violence?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. And I think we need to understand what is the real concept of intersectionality before to discuss about the question, because sometimes when we think in intersectionality, we relate the concept with social movements. We relate the concept with a lot of groups fighting or trying to advocate for the same goal at the end. But when we talk about intersectionality inside to the society, we need to understand that the intersectionality tries to explain how we have gaps inside to the society and how some groups have privilege and how some groups need to face obstacles. So the intersectionality concept is a theoretical framework for understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination or privilege inside to the society. So some examples of these aspects are, for example, the gender, the sex, the social or economical position, the sexual orientation, the sexuality, the religion, and of course the position inside to the society. So the intersectionality try to identify what aspects provide you an advantage or provide you opportunities inside to the society, or what conditions you have in order to have obstacles or in order to have gaps between you and other social groups. So in short and simple words, the intersectionality tries to explain, okay, you are, for example, a woman and you don't have access to education. So you are part of a minority, so you probably are going to face a lot of discrimination and you are going to face a lot of obstacles inside to your life. Same situation with, for example, people living with HIV, same situation to people, sexual diverse people in the same situation, for example, with people with lack of education, with lack of access to healthcare services. So the intersectionality puts a label on you and puts an obstacle or puts a privilege on you. So if we think on that, we need to understand that we live in a heteronormative culture. So all the labels are related with that. So if we fit inside to this model, if, for example, if we are heterosexual and if we have a good economical position, if we have access to education, if we are men, probably we are going to have better opportunities inside the society. But for example, if we are a minority or if we are a marginalized group, and we don't have the same opportunities, probably we need to face and we need to live with a gap between a lot of groups. So even inside to the marginalized groups, we have difference and we have different obstacles. Because, for example, if you're a woman, probably you are going to face a gap between men and women at the same time. But if you are a woman, but for example, if you're a sex worker, if you are living with HIV, if you don't have access to education, if you don't have access to information, you are going to have a lot of disadvantages between another woman who has access to education, who has access to information, who has formal work. So inside to the society, we have these rules and these roles. And these rules and roles trying to create this difference and try to explain who fit inside to the advantages and who fits inside to these disadvantages. So as I say, inside to the same groups with disadvantages, we have gaps. So for example, if you know that you don't have opportunities, if you know that you're facing obstacles, and you know that you are suffering violence, you know that you are suffering discrimination, and you want to do a complaint, for example, you want to have justice for you, but you know that the system right now is not working in the best way. The system is not providing real justice, equal justice. So you need to think and you need to evaluate if you want to lose your position, if you want to lose the opportunities that you have. So many people, so many survivors don't want to do the complaints, don't want to do this, don't want to have justice, because of course you know that lose your position, lose your privilege, it is an option. So we have this invisibilization of violence because we know that the violence exists. We know that we have discrimination. We know that we have these advantages or these disadvantages inside the society, but we don't know the real situation about the violence because so many survivors prefer not do anything against the aggressor in order to try to continue with the position that they have right now inside to the social groups. So the people prefer be quiet and try to cover the aggressions, try to cover the violence in order to continue fitting inside to the rules and the roles inside to the society. But of course, we have people who is losing the fear, who is losing this idea, and they are trying to provide visibility and they are trying to do the complaints. But the legal system and the society are not ready to affront this situation. So, as I say, we have gaps inside to the gaps, we have obstacles inside to the obstacles. So for example, if you know that you are not in a good position, for example, if you're a trans woman, so you know that you are suffering discrimination because you are trans, you are suffering discrimination because your sexual orientation probably is not heterosexual, you are suffering discrimination because of course you don't have access to education, you have a lot of economical obstacles, but you know that you can have some opportunities, you know that you can have some advantages inside the society, so you prefer continue with these advantages, you prefer to continue with these opportunities, and you decide to live with the violence. So if we don't try, if we don't try to eliminate these gaps, if we don't try to eliminate this intersectionality, the violence is still continue being invisible for so many people. And with this invisibilization, we create an impunity culture against the violence, against the discrimination, and against the stigmatization inside the society. So we need to break these rules, we need to break the system in order to create equality. And of course, in order to close these gaps between the privilege and between the obstacles, between the opportunities, in between, of course, the lack of opportunities. So the intersectionality culture or the intersectionality system is really dangerous, because even if you want to break with these rules, even if you want to break these roles, you need to fight against the society, and you need to fight against the groups living with privilege. So the intersectionality at the end promotes difference between the societies, between the social groups, and promote the role that you need to play inside the society. So as I say, yes, the intersectionality is creating difference between the society, is creating invisibilization, and is creating impunity. So even if you want to break these rules, you need to fight with all the instructions that the society has. So it is a complicated situation, and it is something wrong and something bad, especially for the groups who are living with disabilities or disadvantages. But this is an old system. This is part of us. This is part of the society. So we need to advocate for create a new system. We need to advocate in order to break these rules. But as I say, it's something old, it's something with a lot of years, and the society is working in a bad way, of course, but is working with these rules. So it's going to be super complicated create a new system. Of course, right now the social movements are trying to be intersectional and are trying to fight together, and are trying to provide visibility together, because if they stay together, probably they are going to have more visibility and they are going to have a better voice inside the society. But these same groups that are fighting together in an intersectional way are the same groups that are facing the obstacles and the disadvantages inside the society thanks to this intersectional framework. So the situation is not the best, and we still have a lot of things to change. But thanks to the intersectional social movements, we are trying to win, and we are trying to create something better for the society. And of course, we are having a better voice. But the thing is, so many groups try to fight in an independent way. So of course, probably they are going to have, or they are going to win the fight, but it's going to be a little bit more complicated because they are probably alone inside to the society, fighting against the rules and fighting against the rules. So we need to convert the intersectionality in something good and try to create unification and try to do a collective fight against all these rules.
Thank you, Fatima. Of course, unity is, I think, the biggest answer to all our problems that we're discussing today. My next question was to Ms. Aditi again, if you would like to answer. This is, how do you think we can create effective, accountable, and gender-responsive justice institutions in terms of availability, accessibility, and accountability?
Thank you for that question, Tasnia. Before I begin answering, since you've used the word gender responsive, I want to acknowledge that even though today is the day for International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women, when we talk about gender-based violence, it's important to understand that it affects other genders and non-gender conforming individuals as well. Particularly when you talk about intersectionality, as Fatima mentioned, members of the trans community and even male members of the society. I think when we talk about creating effective and accountable justice institutions, we need to place primary emphasis on independence and transparency of those institutions. Independence and transparency in police investigations, independence and transparency in courtroom trials. And I think the first challenge in understanding when an institution is not being accountable is in the lack of information. This is a slight offshoot, but let's take the example of plea bargaining in India. Excuse me. I was recently doing some research on rape statistics in India, and that's why I've been talking about National Crimes Record Bureau here today. So plea bargaining is a practice where you negotiate. The prosecution and the defense negotiate. The defense pleads to a guilt offense, which is a lesser offense than the one that they've been charged with. And in exchange, they get lenient sentencing. Now, according to Indian criminal laws, plea bargaining is not permissible for the offense of rape. However, the National Crimes Records Bureau of India shows, even though the numbers are minuscule, but it shows that even though it's impermissible, plea bargaining is happening in rape cases in India. And I mean, this comes back to the point that of lack of information. Not being able to access this data would, I mean, if I did not know that this data exists, that this was happening, I wouldn't have realized that this was a problem within the institution. The fact that accused persons are able to access, are able to use plea bargaining in rape cases is concerning. And this NCRB data helps us identify this, this malpractice or irregularity. So information opens up this avenue for accountability within these institutions. So first of all, there are accountability institutions, but those accountability institutions also need to be accountable. And then coming back to what we've been discussing here today, what other measures we can make to make these institutions more gender responsive as well. We can begin by first training and providing support to police officers, prosecutors, lawyers, judges on what it means to be survivor-centric in approaches to justice and how intersectionality affects different survivors differently. So Fatima talked about how a person who comes from privilege may have a different experience of the criminal justice system from a person who comes from a lower economic strata of the society. Maybe they're marginalized on the basis of their religion. Maybe they're marginalized on the basis of their caste. Maybe they are from a tribal community. There's so many different things that can, within the intersectional approach, hinder the access to an institution. And when you are as a criminal justice mechanism, these members of this mechanism, so office, police, prosecutors, judges, lawyers, should be aware of what it means for each, that the fact that each survivor is not the same. And I mean, unfortunately, most of these professionals are predominantly male. And so diversity is also key here. Diversity is key in dismantling old and patriarchal notions of what constitutes violence against women, whether whether a domestic dispute is something that needs to be resolved at home, or if it's something that is worthy of a police complaint. And then, of course, who is a victim? I want to give the example of a trial that happened in India recently, down south, where the High Court, in its bail order to the defense, to the accused, said that the victim had fallen asleep. This language may be triggering to some of you. I apologize in advance. The victim had fallen asleep during the sexual assault that she was undergoing, and the judge said that that's not what a victim is supposed to be doing. As opposed to, I don't know what a victim is supposed to be doing, but according to the judge, a survivor should not fall asleep while they're being raped. And so they said that this is not, there's something fishy in this case, and we are going to grant the accused bail. And the fact that this language exists means that there's something in the minds of the judges about what it means to be an ideal victim. And they need to be taught, not just judges, actually, lawyers, police officers, prosecutors, everybody who is part of the system, even doctors, if I may say so, who is a victim. There's no straitjacket formula. You can't pigeonhole individuals into, okay, so they are not showing signs of pain or injury, or they fell asleep, or they're wearing makeup, so they may be they're not they don't deserve the same attention as another survivor who shows all the other symptoms, indicia of being a victim of sexual assault. And then I also want to talk about training of these individuals. Apart from on survivor centricism and intersectionality, they also need to be trained on how to collect evidence properly and how to interrogate witnesses in court, so that they can avoid re-traumatization. I think defense lawyers, particularly, I have been a defense lawyer in the past, so I speak from some experience, that they require sensitivity in their approach. You don't need to be insensitive when you are interviewing, when you are cross-examining a witness. They should always be, measures should also be taken, especially when laws don't allow for them right now, to maintain the confidentiality of the victim if they so choose, to be able to hold proceedings in camera, which means behind closed doors, so that media cannot report on the details of the case. And then, of course, you should also have, you should align all the measures that you are taking with international standards. So, for example, CEDAW, the Commission for Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, has a lot of material on how you can tackle violence against women. And both India and Bangladesh are members of CEDAW. So I think when we talk about harmonizing criminal law standards with international human rights law, it's not a difficult goal. It's easily done. It's actually asking for their assistance, asking the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women for assistance. They are sitting there to help us. And actually, if it might be that you don't even need their assistance, they've already they every year they come out with these reports, and I'm sure that there's a report on how medical professionals can work with survivors of sexual violence on the UN Special Procedures website. And then, of course, other measures that you can take are practical measures. You can have if you're running phone numbers, phone services for survivors to report crimes, that they should be easily accessible, easy to remember, always on. Something that that we've noticed during the pandemic is that all of these services were overburdened with calls from women who were suffering domestic abuse inside their houses. So being able to deal with influx of cases in such times is also something that institutions need to take into account. And then coming to the perspective of the perpetrator. So post-crime rehabilitation for the perpetrator is also important, because you don't want you want to be able to bring an end to this, right? The purpose of this day is to eliminate all forms of sexual violence. So being able to understand from a criminological perspective what are the circumstances that lead to a person committing sexual violence are important. And then, of course, while you're providing post-crime rehabilitation to the perpetrator, you also have to provide rehabilitation to the victim, to the survivor. So if they need shelter, if they need access to security and safety services, if they need protection from, if it was members of their family, if they need economic empowerment, so access to civil society organizations, police, access to other social security institutions that can help them get on their feet and to survive this incidence and this trauma and move forward with their lives. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants to be defined by something that has happened to them, but by the decisions that they take. And I think that I'll leave it at that, Tasnia.
All right, thank you so much. We're actually on kind of not following the schedule, so I'm just going to ask the next question to Mr. Rafi. And it's actually a question that I think the answer you all want to hear. Well, I think basically this is probably the most important question of all. What role do you think men play or should play when it comes to advocate about ending violence against women?
Thank you, Fátima. And you're absolutely correct. That's probably the most important question that we must answer in those circumstances. But I would really like to thank Aditi and Fátima for their addition to the discussion. And there are a couple of things that I'm actually going to pick up from the discussion, because they've been very, very helpful and relevant to what I'm about to say. If we were to kind of pick a point where there has been a violence committed against a woman, a man could have done something more to prevent it. And once it has been committed, what can he do so that the woman gets justice? Aditi has kind of perfectly kind of summarized and pointed out in detail how we can change the system, how we can improve it, what the measures that we can take. The talk about having these national standards in the subcontinent and all over the world really. But I'll go back to a bit more to the root of the problem, to a more fundamental issue. It boils down to education. We need to educate men. I would really like to say that we need to educate all human beings, but as where we stand right now, we need to educate men. Education can be given in two places, in family and in schools as well. Coming to the family, a young kid, a boy or a son needs to be taught how to respect a woman. He needs to be taught with examples. As soon as a husband in a household disrespects a wife, the son thinks that is normal and I can do that as well. That's somewhere where, as a family, you can teach your son or the men to, you know what, you can do better, or you're not entitled to do as such. That's one thing. The second is when we come to school. There's a lot that a school can do to improve your character, and more importantly, tell you what's right and what's wrong. And if you come up here, literally two things would probably solve the problem. Is that you need to understand what consent is. and needs to understand what respect is and what is, of course, what amounts to disrespect as well. We have social science classes in schools, but they're not very practical. We need to have classes where the students are taught about sex education. They're taught about what amounts to a consensual sexual relationship and what is not consensual. When you respect a woman's choice, and that is, by the way, all the time, but this needs to be taught practically with examples and not just in a textbook. So just giving them a book or a video to look into, that's not enough. It needs to be taught in school, and it should be compulsory as math, English, and other languages, and physics and chemistry. That's one. The second one, and the reason why I'm picking up on this is because, as Fátima pointed out, and Aditi rightly pointed out as well, it's a very much patriarchal society at the moment. These men who would grow up to be leaders and probably play a pivotal role in the future generations to come, having this knowledge, having these skills, having this idea about and concept about what amounts to consent and what doesn't, will ultimately make a difference into how he acts when he's in a position of power. Why? Let me give you a very simple example. Aditi actually pointed a very good example that, using death penalty as a deterrent for rape victims or to prevent rape, it's not really ultimately a solution. Even if I set aside the fact that, yes, very few cases are reported in the first place, or that guilty verdicts are not as common as you would think, the problem still lies with the fact that from an accused or from a perpetrator's point of view, a person who has just committed a rape, he would rather kill that woman instead of keeping her alive, because first of all, she won't be there to tell the story. And it doesn't matter anyway, because death penalty is there for both rape and murder. At that moment, it doesn't make a difference. So using a short-term solution to problems as such is not going to help us in the long run. We need people who can make better policy decisions, who can understand the concept that, all right, this is what needs to be done, not because the society is asking for it or as a short answer, but we need to look into the holistic, we need to look at the whole image and then come to a solution which will give us probably the best long-term solution to a problem. Now, coming back to education, the education probably starts with myself and with an individual. It probably starts with the fact that when a friend of mine makes a derogatory remark to a woman in front of me, is that I tell him that, you know what, it's not right. It's a very small step, but that's how it starts, that you need to know what is wrong, what is right. That ultimately goes back to your education, what you've learned, what you've seen in your household. If I grew up in a household where I feel that my dad is allowed to be abusive towards my mother, I would probably learn and grow up to be just the same, because that has been, to me, normalized. And I continue to pass it to the generations to come. This is something that really needs to be, worked on, which is probably one word, education. And the second thing I would say is, it's about kind of doing the bare minimum, at least just from your side. Even if you can't do it for the society, do it from your side. Try to help out as much as you can from where you are standing. I can do that, let's say, as a lawyer. We do that from a law firm. All family law matters, especially related to abuse, related to extramarital affairs, anything, we always do that on a pro bono basis, because these are matters, these are people that need help from the legal system. And us, even though being a corporate chambers, we do not charge our clients regarding these issues, because that's the smallest thing, that's the least we can do from our position. But as an individual, I can probably work towards improving the quality of life for a woman related to my life by doing this small thing, by asking my friend to maybe, not doing this because it's not right, or maybe he's doing it unintentionally, but even then I must tell him that, you know what you're doing is not right. And it also matters, you need to pick up on the small things that kind of indicate that a person is probably going through a certain thing. In our society, we disregard mental health completely. We do not ask a person, how you are by actually meaning that question, the answer to that question is always, I'm fine. But is he? Is she? Kind of going to that problem that, is everything okay? The reason why I'm using my friend's example, because in last 1 year, I've had to deal with not less than 6 cases in between my friend circle or people that they know. And of course, it's about violence on women. And probably the most horrific bit was, it was done at their own home, most of the time, by their parents, by the father, or the mother just standing and doing nothing, or even the brother. And this is where I feel no law, no policy, no deter can stop this from happening, except for education, which tells them that this is not right. This is not what you're entitled to. This is not something that you can get away with. So I feel that as a man, you need to start young. You need to start when it's the right time, when they're actually educating themselves in school, if needed in the universities, but you teach them what is right, what is wrong, what is consent, what is non-consensual, what is respect, and what is just disrespectful. Excuse me. So this ultimately kind of boils down in summary to what Fátima said. We need to break down the society, the current society, the structure that we have in society. We need to break that. We need to create a new one. But that's not going to start tomorrow. That's not going to happen in 5 years. That's not going to happen in 10 years. That's going to happen when you build up your next generation and our generation to know better, to do better. Only then, once we or our next generation is in position of power, they can make the changes that's necessary in terms of policy, in terms of implementation, in terms of training, as Aditi suggested. It could be in terms of police, it could be the medical officials, whatever it is, but also at the same time, making sure that the violence does not take place in the first place. So yeah, that's all I have to say. And I would just say that thank you for having me. It's really been a pleasure to kind of give you a piece of my mind on this matter. And I personally learned a lot from what the other speakers had to say. So, and it's something that I would be hopefully able to implement in my practice as well in the future. So thank you.
Welcome. Don't leave. We still have a question and answer session to do. Yeah. So thank you very much. I think what you said about educating, it obviously is the only and the step we should be talking about. And we always, advocate about all these matters when something goes wrong. But we should just be doing it beforehand, like you said. Like in medicine, we say prevention is better than cure. I think it applies to all aspects of life. So thank you again. And my next question is to Fátima. So like Rafid answered his question about role of men, I would like you to tell us about what you think the role of healthcare professionals is in terms of advocating against violence that happens to women.
Thank you for the question. So before to discuss the question, we need to understand something. The healthcare providers, we as a future health providers, we have a special tool or a special opportunity inside the society. And this opportunity or this tool is the privilege. We have the privilege. We have a better position inside the society. We have access to education. We have access to information, and that's provide you benefits inside to the society. Sometimes the privilege provide us a special right or provide us special opportunities or special benefits inside the society. But the privilege is power, is providing us this special tool inside to the social groups. And the privilege provide us visibility too. So the privilege can be a positive tool if we know how to use it, if we understand the power that the privilege provides us. So the thing is, so many people, because of course not just the healthcare providers have privilege, so many people use the privilege in a wrong way. They use this power, they use this tool just for the day, just for find or have benefits inside to the social groups. But as I say, the privilege provide us visibility and voice inside to the social groups. So if we try to use this special power in a good way, we can try to create a better change. We can try to create inclusion inside to the society, because of course we as a future health providers and the health providers have visibility and have a better position inside to so many groups. So if we say something, is if we discuss something, probably the people is going to hear us, the people is going to try to understand what we are saying, and the people is going to try to understand the context about the problem that we are trying to provide voice. So we need to use this special power in order to advocate for equality, in order to fight and in order to create inclusive spaces for everyone around the world, and for create inclusive spaces for all the marginalized groups. So we need the first step to use this privilege in a positive way is know the situation and know the concepts and know the background around the problem, because the new doctors, the young doctors probably understand the situation. They probably understand and have a more inclusive idea about the society, and probably they have a more inclusive idea about the marginalized groups. But the old doctors or the traditional doctors probably have a more conservative position, or probably they have a more conservative idea about the society and about the equality inside to the social groups. So the first step is try to understand the situation and share our knowledge with the rest of the doctors, share our knowledge and share our information with the future health providers. So for example, here in IFMSA, we have an important platform because we have communication tools, we have connections, and we have information and education. So we can use this power in order to share this education, in order to share the situation and provide voice. And of course, create a more inclusive environment. So we can implement, for example, the peer education. We as a IFMSA members, we as a SCORA members know what is the situation. We understand the concept of gender-based violence. We know the situation with the LGBTIQ community. We know what is the real situation with people living with HIV, trans people, people with lack of sexual and reproductive health and rights. So if we know this information and if we have the resources to share our knowledge, we need to do it. Because if we share our knowledge with other people, probably these people is going to share the knowledge with other group of people. So we can start a huge change just sharing our knowledge, sharing our privilege, and sharing our voice with the rest of the people. So the change is in us and we are the change, but we need to understand the power of the privilege, and we need to use the privilege not just in us. We need to use this special immunity inside the society in order to provide voice to the people who doesn't have voice. But the first step, as I say, is share information and understand. And of course, we need to try to do the change, because some people know the privilege and know the information, but if they are not being affected for the problem, if they are not part of the problem, probably they are going to think twice if they want to do something or not. Because of course, if we raise our voices, if we try to do the changes, probably we are going to suffer discrimination too. And the discrimination is going to be for association, because so many people is going to think, oh, okay, you are agree with this marginalized group, you are trying to create equality, and that's not good, that's not okay for the rules and the roles inside the society. So probably you are going to suffer marginalization too. But as I say, if we use the intersectionality, if we fight together, probably we are going to have more power and we are going to have better opportunities. But the first step is want to do something and try to do something with these opportunities that we have. And the second point is try to provide more visibility to the problems, is try to provide complaint spaces, and of course we need to try to create programs, or we need to try to create some tools for provide a comprehensive care, because the healthcare providers, of course, they can attend, for example, emergencies related with violence against women, that they can attend sexual violence cases, they can attend physical aggressions, but we don't have a comprehensive healthcare system. So sometimes we attend the emergency and that's it. But we need to try to create more inclusive systems, and of course provide, for example, mental health attention, provide psychological attention, and we need to create some strategies to include the victims, include the survivors against inside to the social groups. So we need to understand that we have a power, we have an special tool, and the decision is in us, because we have the change and we are the change. But the thing is, we need to do the change together, because if I raise my voice in a single way, probably I'm not going to have a huge impact. But if I raise my voice and you raise your voice and another groups raise their voice at the same time, we are going to generate a more impact, and we are going to generate a better and a stronger social movement. So as I said, we need to share information, and we need to use this privilege in order to provide voice to the people who hasn't had voice inside to the social groups. And again, in my last message is, use your power, because you are the power and you have the power to change the society.
Thank you, Fátima. Thank you for that very nice, comprehensive answer. So I think that's what it is, right? We, as medical professionals or students who are going to be professionals in the future, we cannot limit ourselves to curing like physical health problems. We need to realize that health is a much wider spectrum, inclusive of sexual reproductive health rights and violence against women as well, in terms of mental health aspects and sexual and reproductive health aspects. So we cannot limit ourselves to diseases anymore, because we need to address these things and we need to advocate. So that's what it is, I think. Thank you very much for the summary. And right now I'd like to open the question and answer session. So feel free to ask questions in the chat box, and I'll be asking on behalf of you to our speakers. We actually have a question already, a few questions in the chat box already. So I think I'll just start. So first question is it's directed towards Ms. Aditi. So Gayatri Lakshmi says, while family plays a key role in the survivor coming forward to access the justice they are entitled to, would Ms. Pradhan shed light on cases where crimes against women, children, etc. happens within the family itself? Pertaining to the fact that a lot of cases of violence against a girl, woman, or child of either gender happens within the family as well. So we hear about these cases, right? So could you please take the question?
Sure, thank you for this question. I think I don't know if how this misconception came to be, but there is this misconception in society that violence against women happens mostly outside of family, but that it's actually the contrary of that. Most violence occurs within the family setup. Intimate partner violence, like I took the example of domestic violence, dowry related harassment, marital rape. Marital rape is not even recognized as a crime in India. So first step is acknowledging that this is a wrong. Marital rape is not even recognized as a wrong because we believe that once a person has said, yes, I agree to be married to you, then I've lost the right to give consent to each and every individual sexual act that I engage in with you. And then, of course, there's also female infanticide and female feticide in India, particularly in states up north, where we have a very skewed sex ratio because of the preference for a male child. And then there is forced child marriages. That's also a problem that occurs within families because people like to see, and I don't know if I actually you are all aware of this discussion, but there has been a discussion on increasing the age for child marriage in India for women. They're talking about moving it from 18 to 21. But the problem is that even with the age, which is right now 18, there is lack of implementation of that law. So changing acts or words or languages on paper is not the solution to eliminating violence against women, especially when it comes to families, because you are bound down by these shackles, by these notions that this is how a woman should behave, or this is how a man should be in a family, how they should behave. And I also want to take an example of what it happened, like what happens after an incident comes to be reported. A woman undergoes some kind of violence. Like I mentioned earlier on, there are the notion of family honor gets attached to what happens to a woman. So people are hesitant to allow the woman to approach police and ask for any kind of police action. There was, I mean, not that there is a single incident, there are many incidents, but family plays a big role in trying to get a woman who goes and files a police complaint in reconciling with the perpetrator, be it from within the family or from outside the family. So I take the example of a girl from Bareilly, which is a town in Uttar Pradesh in India, where she was forced to marry the man who had allegedly raped her. Because her family members and the village elders said that, we will not be able to take care of you and your child. So that's also a way how the family role comes into play in not only directly perpetrating the violence, but then in continuing to um, to not stop the cycle of perpetration and reperpetration by actively allowing others to let things get in the way of the survivor seeking justice. I hope, Tasnia, that answers the question.
Yes, it answers the question to be. Lakshmi, you can always add to it, or if you have any other questions about this question, you can message or even unmute and speak. And I'd like to address my next question to Fátima. This is from Divya. Do you think that the toxic sorry, I lost the question. Okay, toxic masculinity comes in the way of sexual liberation and oppression of women? I think what you're trying to say is kind of leading patriarchy and stuff, right? Do you think toxic masculinity comes in the way of sexual liberation and oppression of women? And I think I would like Mr. Rafid to answer this question too, since where it's directed to masculinity. So whoever wants to go first.
Okay, I can go first. So we, as I say in my first question, we live in a heteronormative culture. And this heteronormative culture is related with toxic masculinity too, because these rules and roles inside the society trying to create a gap and difference between genders. So many people have the idea that being men is a privilege. Being men provides you a better position inside the society, and being men provides you better qualities than a woman. So so many people really think that, okay, I'm a man, so I'm better than you. I'm a man, so I have better qualities than you. So in the recent time, the feminist movements and the equal movements are trying and are winning voice, and they are winning representation, and these groups are winning and doing a lot of changes inside to the society. But these roles and these rules are stronger inside to the society. So even if we are creating these movements, even if we are trying to provide visibility, and even if we are fighting for equality and equal rights, these roles are super hard to change. And the people grow up with these ideas. So if we don't change the chip, if we don't change these ideas, it's going to be hard to create a real equality. Because yes, so many groups are fighting, so many groups are trying to do a change, but so many groups are good with this system. They are good with these rules. And of course, if they are not being affected for the violence, if they are not being affected for the lack of equality inside the society, they are not going to do anything. So this patriarchy or this heteronormative culture needs to be changed, and we need to try to do the change when the people is young, and when you can learn a different system, when you can learn different ideas about how the society works. So the feminist movements are trying to do a changes, and they are doing changes. And right now I think we are living a new wave of feminists, because we are using new technologies, and we are using the intersectionality, and we are using new strategies to provide visibility. But the toxic masculinity is something traditional, but and they are not doing changes, because the same structure that we have right now probably is the same structure that the old people had into the past, but it's super strong. So even if we are trying to use methodologies for provide equality, we still have too many changes to do. And as I say, the change needs to be done when the people is young, and when the people can learn a different methodology and and they can understand that we have a different way to live our life, and we have a better and a different structure for the society. So we need to transmit this knowledge, and we need to share this information. And of course we need to try to change the system, because if we change the system, if we change the laws, if we change the roles, we can provide more visibility, and probably we can have a better impact. And of course the fears and the main goal for the feminist movements is try to even if I'm not being affected for the problem, is try to have empathy, because I know I'm not a consequence. I'm not suffering the violence, but I know that the people is living the problem. So I need to create this empathy, and I need to try to understand the situation and share the voice with the people who is suffering. So with this, we are going to invisibilize the masculinism and the toxic masculinity, and we are going to provide a better environment for equality.
Right. Thank you, Fatima. We have a lot of questions. Rafid, would you like to add to the answer of the previous question before we move on?
Yeah, sure. I'll just take a minute. If you could just be kind enough to just repeat the question, please. I just want to be like very like specific with the answer.
Go up to the question. Okay, so I found it. Do you think that the toxic masculinity comes in the way of sexual liberation and oppression of women? I think this is directed towards patriarchal belief.
Yes, 100%, 100%. First of all, as a man, it's not even about who you are as a man, it's about what you're expected to be as a man. Because it's a patriarchal society, it's expected that you're going to do a certain things, or else you seem weak, or you're not man enough. So yeah, that definitely gets in the way to simple matters such as your wife talking to another person. That might be an issue, because as a man you're going to be like, no, you just don't speak to anyone else. That's just a very simplistic issue, but I'm just trying to point that out. And the same goes for if you go to, you take a step back and think of a young woman who is kind of probably just discovering her sexuality, who's kind of finding her preferences. It's probably most of the time the men, the dad, who will probably be like, no, you know what, the solution to the problem is getting you married to a guy and everything will be fine. And that also comes from the fact that, you're a man, you're supposed to take care of your family and you do it any way you want to. Or else, someone's going to say, Mr. X, oh, well, he's not a man. I mean, his wife, his daughter is doing what she wants with life and he's not doing anything about it. So definitely toxic masculinity is probably one of the root causes of the oppression of women and the sexual liberation as well. A lot of those things get kind of, repression takes place. A lot of the sexual preferences are always, it's always inside the closet because someone decided that, coming out or saying or talking about it is probably not the right thing to do. Not because it's your issue, but it's because how would I be deemed, how would I be presented in the society because I'm a man? I must conform to a particular norm of being this person, who kind of, decides how everything should be done.
Right, thank you. Okay, so there are some people here who want to address you themselves by unmuting and opening the camera. So we'll just allow that for a few questions. So I first have Sabiha Said from BMSS. Would you like to unmute and speak? And if you want, you can turn on your camera too.
Hello, so I have a question. How can we communicate and make senior doctors with conservative mindsets stand with us rather than oppose us? Because they can be resistant to new ideas or feel like they don't want to learn from their juniors because they feel inadequate, that their juniors may know something more about some topics, or they may feel like their values are being attacked. So how can we encourage them to support us without alienating them?
Aditi, would you like to answer?
I don't have a lot of experience working with doctors in my work.
Fátima, would you like to do the honors?
I would like to say that having worked with lawyers and senior and judges who are equally opposed to the idea of accepting new things, what I found works is statistics. And I think with the medical profession, because you're a profession of the science, you should really be using that science to back up what you want support with, and getting the senior doctors on board. I hope that helps.
It does. I think that's a wonderful idea. Fátima, would you like to add?
Yes, so I think that we need to be insistent and consistent with the strategy, and the people need to understand that they don't need to be the cause to defend the cause. And we have the numbers and we have the statistics and we have real cases and we have real scenarios about the current situation. So we need to share and share and share, because if we do that in a consistent way, probably we are going to do a change. And believe me, with the time that people try to understand, and even if they don't understand, they start to listen and they start to think in the situation. So if we win that, if we do that changes inside to the people, we are going to do something. But we need to lose the fear, because as I say in the previous questions, if we defend, if we provide voice, sometimes we are going to suffer discrimination too, we are going to suffer violence too. But we need to live with that, and we need to be strong, and we need to stay together. But you need to share and advocate, because even if the older people is not, they don't want to hear you, probably the younger people is going to hear you, and they are going to want to do something. So you need to be consistent and lose the fear and lose all the probably the mental obstacles that you have, and you are going to do something for the society.
Thank you, Fatima. We're actually running out of time, but there are a lot of questions. If I can't allow some of you to ask them, I'm gonna find a way to get the answers to you later. Apologies beforehand. And I'll just Saqib, you want to ask? Can you unmute and go ahead with your question? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tasni Appu. Actually, I had three questions to three of our honorable guests. So if it is okay for everyone to like reply it in the short. So Rafid sir is that Aditi ma'am already addressed the marital rape scenario in her country, India. And you know that in Bangladesh, few ago, we had a scenario like a 14-year-old girl was raped after her marriage with a 34-year-old husband. Uproar in Bangladesh on this issue, and people have started to talk on marital rape. However, a very high portion of the society thinks that it's okay to rape a woman if she is married. So I would like to hear the perspective of Rafid sir and what he thinks needs to be done to actually criminalize marital rape in Bangladesh. My second question is to Aditi ma'am is that in this particular event by SCORA, we had a debate in the very first session on not on men are guilty, they're victims. So we do see that some women actually play this card to be the victim of sexual assault and then utilize the opportunity to benefits from the male. So how to address these issues if a woman actually fakes her own assault? So how the society needs to address this issue? You yourself is a medical student, and I do not know about the medical in other countries, but I can say for my country is that though this is an open platform, but trust me, in my medical, 90% of the people are so narrow-minded on this issue, and they in the end they will held the women responsible for whatever they do. Classmates, and what should we do in our medical curriculum to address this issue if we have to handle a rape victim or a rape patient in the future. So that's all my three questions. Thank you.
Right. So I can also start with the first question. Right. I'll just keep it very short, Safi. Thank you. That's actually a very time-worthy question. Yes, I'm very aware of the case, and it's something very, very unfortunate and something that we probably never want it to be repeated. First thing is, before you find a solution to the problem, the first thing you need to do is identify, first say that we have a problem. Yes, we have a problem. We do not criminalize marital rape. The first thing we need to do is probably just have laws in place to criminalize it first. In the UK, the case of R against A, about 50 years back, if I'm not mistaken, criminalized marital rape. And that's what kind of may ensure that in the future, whenever you do it, it is a crime. So first of all, it needs to be identified. It needs to be recognized in law. Number two, create publicity, you need to have awareness campaigns, especially in rural areas and places where, people are not as educated as they are in the metropolitan cities and towns, and kind of tell them that, what, this is not right. Have sessions, have workshops, have the NGOs work on this, but to make sure that this is not right. And probably the easiest way to probably do it would be criminalize the offense first, and then they would know that, yes, if I do it the next time, I am a criminal, or I might just get prosecuted, and then make them aware and deter people from doing it in the future. Thank you. I hope that answers your question, and I'll just give the floor to Aditi now.
Yeah, thank you, Saqib, for your question. And to keep my answer short, I'll say that I take your point on board. I agree that there have been instances where women have been have falsely accused other persons of sexual assault. However, what the statistics tell us is that the number of the proportion of those cases in the universe of all sexual assault cases is very few. And the reason why I'm not worried, even though this phenomena exists is because especially when we deal with criminal law, the standard of proof is very high. You need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that an offense has occurred. So I think as a member of the criminal law fraternity and who's practiced criminal law, I greatly believe in, and having been a defense lawyer, I believe in the principle of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And I am not worried about the fact that some men are not guilty and then that they can be falsely held guilty of a crime. I think that the criminal justice system is strong enough to withstand those false allegations. Thank you.
Dear Sakib, please can you repeat the question, please, because I couldn't hear you.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having internet issues. So my question to Fatima ma'am, our medical scenario, we see that 80% or 90% of our classmates hold some conservative point of view.
Okay, I think there's a problem with the network connection in Sakib.
Am I audible?
No, but can you just write it in the chat and she'll answer it to you in chat later.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I will write it in the chat.
Thank you. Okay. So actually, I think we've taken up more of your time than we asked for. And I'm really sorry about that, but it's been really nice to have you three. And thank you so much for speaking in this webinar. I've personally had a very enlightening experience, and I think all of us here have too. Thank you again for your time and for giving us an insight towards the legal aspects of violence against girls and women. So I'd like to end it here with a note of thanks and with the hope that if we ever again require legal expertise in any of our events that we take, we can always approach you and you'll be there to support us. And that's all from me. For the participants, thank you a lot for joining this session, and I hope it's been of benefit to you. And if you have had asked a question and I didn't take it, it's just because of shortage of time. So you can write it to me personally, and I will personally make sure that you receive your answers. And I will be giving, the host will be giving a link of a post-evaluation form in the chat, and you'll be asked to fill it up. Please kindly do so. And to the speakers, you're free to go about your day. I hope the rest of your day goes amazingly. Thank you so much again for joining us today.
Thank you, Tasnia. Pleasure to be here with all of you. And if anybody has any questions for me, please, I'll be happy to answer them over email through Tasnia and Molly. Thank you so much. Really, when I first heard that the MSAI wanted a lawyer to speak on this issue, I was pleasantly surprised. I'm so glad that medical students take violence against women so seriously. It's heartwarming. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Likewise, it was a pleasure, and glad to have shared some insights into how our society or our legal justice system works. And great to hear from Aditi as well. We are quite alike in a lot of places, yet very different. So it's kind of good to know where we can work on in the future. And guys, excellent initiative. I really appreciate this. And I'm sure as medical students and future medical professionals, there's a lot of differences that you can make, and maybe we can all work together to kind of solve this very, very serious problem. Once again, thank you all. You guys have been lovely, and it was an absolute pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you all. Have a great rest of the evening.
From my side, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for creating these spaces and these initiatives. I really learned a lot today. And for the SCORA members, remember that you have all the SCORA IT and you have me in order to provide you support and in order to provide you spaces and help in anything that you want. And don't forget to advocate, advocate, and advocate, because you have the change and we are the change.
Thank you so much. Well, you can take your leave now, but I'll request the participants to stay and fill the form, please. Thank you. Good night.
Me espero, me espero, me espero.